Hi, Sally.
Hello.
Thanks for joining. It's really good to see you and just have a chat today about disability and belonging in the church, really. But yeah, just tell us a bit about yourself. I know you live in Brighton, and you've been part of a church for quite a long time now. So,
Yeah, thank you for having me, Fiona. I
pleasure.
appreciate it. Yes, as you say, I live in Brighton um, and have done for quite a while. I'm a member of St Peter's Brighton in the centre of Brighton, and I've been going to church there since 2011, which I now realise is quite a long time. um, I live in Brighton with my assistant dog Ethan and my husband Ed and our cat Piccolo, who is less of an assistance but is still a joy. um, I love living here. Although through these kind of coronavirus times, I have had to migrate to my parents at different periods due to care needs. But right now I'm back in Brighton and just enjoying being back by the sea.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, I understand. I'm just about to move to Norfolk to be by the sea, partly to be by the sea. So
Amazing.
it's good thing, good for the soul to be by the sea.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you've been part of your church for 10 years, did you say? 10 years?
Coming up in at the end of the year, it'll be 10 years, yeah.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And how, as a salesperson, how do you sort of find it belonging to church?
It is a challenge, but it's also a joy.
Hmm.
Um, so something that I would probably comment on is that um, right now and since how long? Since 2013, I have been a full-time wheelchair user. And I have 24/7 care, so I've always got a carer with me. Um, and since 2015, I've had Ethan, my assistant dog from K9 Partners. So I am very visibly disabled, and you can see that I come with a whole entourage. Um, Prior to that, um, well, I should say my health has been very up and down. So there were periods way before that where I was a lot poorlier. But prior to that, and being in Brighton and attending church, my disability and my health impairments weren't so visible. And um, in some ways, that made it more difficult. Um, in other ways, it made it easier. So now I'm obviously clearly a disabled person, and you can visibly see that I will need some adaptations. For example, there's no way I'm going to be able to go down the steps to the church basement to go to the toilet, for example. So there are things which are easily recognizable as kind of needing to change, or helping me be welcomed and feel a sense of belonging into the church. Whereas when my disabilities were less visible, um, I still felt that difficulty in belonging, but it was less obvious for other people. And it's quite a hard thing to articulate that you don't feel like you are part of the church in the way that other people are, or
Mm,
you feel isolated, or you
mm,
feel lonely or left out. So it's been an interesting journey. And it's interesting that there are all of these nuances to what being disabled, and for me unwell with poor health, um, means as a Christian and as a member of church.
mm. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's important that we think about the differences between sort of seen and unseen barriers as a disabled person, isn't it?
Absolutely. And also the fact that in the same way amongst non-disabled people, no two disabled people will have the same needs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we also need to remember, which is that we need to approach everybody as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And just because, well, Sally's in a wheelchair doesn't mean that Fred, who's also in a wheelchair, will have the same needs. And that we treat everyone in a way where we are considering, well, what does this person need? And we shouldn't also make assumptions about what they need, and we shouldn't do that on someone else's behalf. We need to be thinking about, well, let's ask Sally
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
what she wants or what she needs, what will make her feel like she belongs more. And I think as we make progress, generally as a church, and when I say church, I mean a wider church, and maybe in society around diversity and inclusivity, it's important to remember that there aren't always blanket things that we can do which is just going to cover everything. Everybody is unique, and it's important to ask individuals if they feel comfortable in having this conversation about what is it that you would like, what is it that would you need, and what would serve you in this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and we've sort of spoken before, haven't we, about as disabled people, how can we sort of have grace for people who may not understand that we are having those obstacles. It's a challenging one, isn't it? Is there anything that you think people can pray for to make sure that, you know, disabled people feel they can belong in the church?
That people could pray for. I think that we could consider this in the whole topic of diversity. I think as a church body, we are starting to think about diversity a bit more, and we're starting to see some changes. So previously, for example, people of colour really weren't represented particularly well. There might have been kind of a disproportionate number of men, maybe middle-class men, leading. And we've started to have discussions around that, and we've started to make changes. And that's wonderful. And I think it's really important that we continue to look into all of those areas where our community is represented in church. So if I was to go out into Brighton, I wouldn't just see white, middle class, fairly rich men who are non-disabled in the city. I would see a whole complex rainbow of people with all kinds of different traits. And we're starting to make moves towards better diversity and inclusivity. But disability needs to be on the agenda. And for me, there are kind of three areas which I would suggest that we prayed around. And those would be, one, representation. So I want to, as a disabled person, if I'm new to a church, if I come in and I do not see anybody who looks like me or sounds like me or who I can relate to, then unless I'm really brave, I'm probably going to be quite discouraged about coming back. It would be fantastic if I saw somebody up on stage giving a preach, or was represented in one of the alpha posters on the side of church, or at the Christmas carols, we had someone do a reading. And obviously we've talked about not all disabilities are visible, but definitely I think that we need to make sure that we have a fair reflection of the people in the community being represented in church. But then another area is around this inclusivity thing, which is that disabled people need to be included in all aspects of church life. And I've got a real passion for the fact that we don't just need to be ministered to, we can minister as well. And maybe that's in the area of disability, and maybe that is teaching other church members about disabled people, both in church and in the wider community, and how to include them. But maybe it's also in other areas. Why can I not do a talk on something other than the area of disability? Why can't I lead a group and it not have anything to do with my disability? So I think that's really important as well, is to bear in mind that there are all of these different aspects of church. So that's the church services, that's kind of smaller groups, that's kind of holidays that are put on, which need to be thought about in terms of, well, how are we going to accommodate and include and actively welcome, if not allow, disabled people to lead in some of these areas?
Yes, yeah, really important point. We've talked about seen and unseen disabilities, and but also having people with visible disabilities in leadership, you know, can be a way to show representation of the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also I think, going back to being the individual, there's often a tendency to for other people to want to pray for healing, or in absolutely the best intention and with true love, to want to make people's situations better. And sometimes I think that's an obvious thing to perhaps to other people to assume, but it's really around, well, we need to ask people, just as we would ask everybody else, would you like prayer, and what would you like prayer about? Because for me, coming to a place where I was happy with my identity as a disabled person took a long time and took a lot of processing. But now I'm in a place where I am proud of being a disabled young woman, and I do research into the lives of young people with disabilities. And there are so many good things in my life. So it isn't the automatic thing that oh, let's pray that Sally can walk again, or let's pray for complete healing. There are other things which I feel passionately about, that I would either like to pray for other people, or for the general community, or if people want to pray for me, maybe there are other priorities that I have. So I think that's important to remember as well.
No, that's really interesting. Sally, thank you. We've well, God, there's a lot to think about there, and I know we could talk for a long time, couldn't we, about these issues, which I'm looking forward to talking about them more. But thanks for sharing a little bit today, and we hope it will be an encouragement, and help people to know where to focus their discussions and their prayer, with helping disabled people belong to church. So thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. I would probably just add that I think it's really important to recognise the love in church.
Yeah.
And that for a lot of people, disabled people and non-disabled people, the sense of belonging and the sense of love that they get through other members of the church, but also the feeling of God's love, is what keeps them going.
Yes.
And is what has helped them go through this pandemic and all of these lockdowns. And I do not want to undermine that in any way. In some ways, I feel blessed that I understand a bit about suffering, because it helps me relate more to the fact that there are other people around the whole world right now who are suffering. And it shows God's love even more because of this relationship I have with the fact that there was suffering on the cross. And so I'd really like to end our discussion just with the fact that there is a tremendous outpouring of love from the church. And all we need to do is be a little bit more thoughtful around how we welcome disabled people and make them feel like they belong. Maybe be a little bit intentional about asking people how we could do things better, or how we could change things and what they need. But ultimately, the real crux of it is just loving people. And disabled people aren't different to non-disabled people in a scary way. It's just about loving your neighbour and loving the other. And that's definitely not something that's lacking in the church.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you.